Okay, good morning, everybody. We're at the bottom of Ayin Chesem with Beis, the two dots at the bottom. Okay, so the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak said, Ha'ochel kikoseves hagasa, person who eats a dried fig hagasa, which means big, kamoha ukigari nasa. It and its seeds, the Mishnah said that he's chayiv. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Adam and Yudit Benzev, in honor of their children, Jake Sarina and Rosie. Week of Learning is sponsored to wish Mel and Judy and Mazel Tov and Teitzchon L'Shalom on their upcoming Aliyah. Although we are sad to see you go, we cannot be happier for you to embark on the next stage of your life. Daf Yomi is sponsored by Matt and Susie Schoenfeld as a schus for Refuah Shalema for Herschel Yisrael ben Pescha Yenta Rezel, and by Bill and Rosie Eskin in memory of Rosie's father, Reb Nachum ben Moshe Zatzal Yartzeit on Yud Tes Tammuz, and Ari and Shoshana Lerner and family, Lili Nishmas, Ari's grandfather Yosef ben Yitzchak HaKohen. Okay, so again, the Mishnah, back at the beginning of the parak, back on Ayin Gimel, said that if a person eats kikoseves hagasa, kamoa ukigari nasa, he's chayiv. Person who eats a dried fig, it and its seeds, then he's chayiv. So chayiv means he's chayiv kares. So what the Gemara is going to try to figure out is what exactly is that shear. Right? The Mishnah's line was like it and its seeds. So says the Gemara, Boi Rav Papa, top of Ayin Tes, kikoseves she'omru b'kigari nasa or below kigari nasa. Does it mean with the seeds or without the seeds? The way Rashi explains, you just take a look at that top Rashi in Ayin Tes. Hadikatani masnisa, that which the Mishnah said, ukigari nasa, with its seeds, mi boile. The Gemara is wondering, hechi ka'amar. How do you read that? Does it mean kamohu ukigari nasa yachad? Does it mean the shear to be chayiv for eating on Yom Kippur means the fig and its seeds together? That means that's all the shear. Kamoha o kigari nasa. Right? That little aleph is to the Bach who throws in the word o. Kamoha o kigari nasa. Does it mean the shear is the fig or its seeds? So does it mean the shear to be chayiv in Yom Kippur is the fig and the seeds together? Or is the right way to read the Mishnah the fig or the seeds? Okay, so what's the main difference about what the shear is, right? We learned last week that even chatzi shear is asr min haTorah. Even to eat a little bit's asr. So what's the big, what difference does it make whether you tell me if you eat this much, this is the shear? So one main difference is the punishment of kares. When is a person chayiv kares? So the Mishnah is saying only when you eat that shear you're chayiv kares. Another main difference that it makes, this is much more practical for us, is that if you have a situation where a person needs to eat on Yom Kippur, the person's not feeling well, so there's two different levels here. If you eat the shear, the amount, whatever it is, kikoseves karinasa, this fig with the seeds, or whatever we're going to come out with this question, so then it's much more stringent. Then it's even kares. If you eat a little bit, that's chatzi shear, which is an isser daraisa. It's prohibited from the Torah according to Rabbi Yochanan, but it's just an isser. It's not chayiv kares. So if you have a person in Yom Kippur who needs to eat, so this is why we get so complicated with giving him little amounts and we figure out how much time to spread it out. It's all to avoid this. Because if you do this, then you get much, much more stringent. So that's the main practical difference that comes out of this. Okay, and Rav Ashi had a question. Etzem kisa ora, biklipasa, or below klipasa. Then when we say etzem kisa ora, which means the size of a bone that can cause tumah, so the shear that Chazal gave is a bone which is like a se'ora, like a barley. So Rav Ashi wasn't sure, what does it mean like a barley? Biklipasa, below klipasa. Does it mean like a barley with its outside shell or without? Belacha or biyavesha. Does it mean a wet one, which would be smaller, or biyavesha, or a dry one? So we have two different, Rav Papa had a question about our Mishnah, and Rav Ashi had a question about the laws of Tumah. So Rav Ashi, Lumi Bailey held Rav Papa. Rav Ashi didn't have Rav Papa's question about our Mishnah because he held Gasa Itmar Kol Kamba, the Gasa. He said that the Mishnah said it needs to be Gasa, which means big. So he understood that the Mishnah meant the bigger shear. And Rav Papa, Lumi Bailey held Rav Ashi. Rav Papa didn't have Rav Ashi's question about Tumah because he held Lacha Shibolis Mikri. If it's wet, it wouldn't be called a Se'ora, it would be called a Shibolis. And Shalo Bekli Pasa, and if it was without its shell, it would be called a different word, an Ushla Mikri. So basically, Rav Papa held if Chazal used the word Etzem Kise'ora, the word Se'ora, which is a reference to barley, must be dry with its shell. Because the other ones, he didn't think it would be the proper word to use the word Se'ora. That's why he didn't have that question. Okay, so what's the answer to our question? Meaning Rav Papa had a question in our Mishnah. That when we said Kikoseves ukigarinosa, did it mean the fig with its seeds? Or did it mean either or, the fig or the seeds? So Amar Rabba Amar Rav Yehuda Koseves Agasa Sha'amru Yeseiru Mikabeya. Okay, I'm sorry. Really, Rav Papa had a question, and Rav Ashi didn't have the question. So that's really all the Gemara is coming out. Rav Papa wasn't sure, and Rav Ashi held that it's for sure the bigger shear. Okay, the Gemara continues. Amar Rabba Amar Rav Yehuda Koseves Hagasa Sha'amru Yeseiru Mikabeya. So we know in other places we have a shear called a kezayis, which the word means like the size of an olive. We have a shear called a kebetza or a kebeya, which means the size of an egg. So now, here by Yom Kippur, we're getting a new shear. Right? We're getting a shear called koseves hagas, like a big fig. So where does that fit? Is that bigger than an egg, or is that smaller than an egg? So it says, Rabba Amar of Yehuda, koseves hagas sha'amru is yiseiru mikabeya. I think that the shear for Yom Kippur eating is bigger than eating an egg. V'kim luhula rabbanon, the bahachi meis vadaite, batzar mehachi lo meis vadaite. And Chazal made their assessment that if you eat that amount, this koseves, so then that gives a person a certain level of meis vadaite, which means a certain level of satisfaction, comfort. He feels like he ate something. But if he ate less than that, so then lo meis vadaite, it didn't have an effect on him. So no, in other words, why is it that by Yom Kippur all of a sudden we get a different shear? Right? If the Torah says you can't eat bugs, so the shear is kazayis. If the Torah says you can't eat blood, the shear is kazayis. So why is it all of a sudden by Yom Kippur the Mishnah came up with a new shear? So the answer is that the Torah wrote it differently by Yom Kippur. Right? The pasuk says by Yom Kippur, asher lo se'una, a person who didn't afflict himself. So since it used a different word, this is going to be Gemara's later, but since it used a different word, Chazal understood it's a different amount. So therefore they came up with the shear of what's called he didn't afflict himself. And they said that amount is like a koseves hagasa, thick, a big fig. So now Rav Yehuda, Rabba Rav Yehuda saying that I'm telling you that shear is a little bit bigger than an egg. Meisvei, Maisav Eviel Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Litamas Hatavshil. We have a story in Sukkot that they brought to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to taste the tavshil, to taste the food. So this is the line the Gemara is going to be paying attention to. To Rabbi Gamliel, they brought him 2 figs, vidli shel mayim, and a bucket of water. V'amru, and they said, Helam l'sukkah. Let's go eat them in the sukkah. They said, let's go eat these figs in the water in the sukkah. V'tani Allah, and we learned on that, lo mipnei shaloch hakach, that they weren't doing it because they have to do it. Elo sheratzu lahachmir al atzman. They wanted to be stringent on themselves. Okay, so we see they said, let's go to the sukkah, but the Gemara is clarifying that we know that they weren't saying you're chayiv, you have to eat these things in a sukkah. Rather, they were being stringent. They wanted to go eat it in the sukkah. And when they gave some to Reb Tzadok, he ate less than a kabeya, not lo b'mapa. So he didn't wash his hands. He wrapped it in a type of napkin so he wouldn't touch the food. And he ate it. He was fine eating it outside of the sukkah. And he didn't bench. Okay, so this is really a different conversation. The Gemara says, but we know that if it's a kebeya, then it needs a sukkah. So if a person eats the size of an egg, he has to eat it in a sukkah. So let's just clarify. If a person eats the size of an egg, he has to eat it in a sukkah. And we have two people who ate 2 figs in a sukkah, but they said, we're not doing it because you have to. We're just being stringent. So that really means they held, you don't have to eat it in a sukkah. Okay, so says the Gemara, salka daitach koseves hagasa sha'amru. Is yisera mikebeya? If you're going to tell me that a big fig is more than the size of an egg, hashta shte kosvas below gar'inin lohavu kebeya. So if 2 figs without seeds is less than the size of an egg, kosevas hagasa karganisa mihavu yisera mikebeya. So 1 fig with its seeds is going to be bigger. In other words, we saw in the Brisa that if something was the size of an egg, you have to eat it in a sukkah. We saw in the Brisa that there was somebody who was brought 2 figs without seeds, and they went and ate it in a sukkah, but they said you don't really have to. So if they said you don't really have to, that means even though it was 2 figs without seeds, it was less than the size of an egg. Because if it's the size of an egg, you have to eat in a sukkah. And if they had 2 figs without seeds, which they said you don't really have to eat in a sukkah, that means it's less than the size of an egg. Now, Rav Yehuda said that when you have a fig with its seeds, it's bigger than an egg. So the Gemara is saying, if I can prove from this story that 2 figs without the seeds is smaller than the size of an egg, so then you're going to tell me 1 fig with seeds is bigger than the size of an egg? Does that make sense? That 2 figs without seeds should be smaller than 1 fig with seeds? Okay, so again, if it's the size of an egg, you have to eat it in a sukkah. But I see in the story that 2 figs without seeds, you don't really have to eat it in a sukkah. Okay, so I see that must be smaller than an egg. But the person said that when our Mishnah said the shear for Yom Kippur, a fig with seeds is bigger than an egg. So the Gemara is saying, let's compare. 2 figs without seeds is smaller than an egg, but 1 fig with seeds is bigger than an egg? It doesn't seem to add up. It would seem like I could prove that if 2 figs without seeds is smaller than an egg, so then I really proved that 1 fig with seeds is also smaller than an egg. So it seemed like I'm proving that the shear for Yom Kippur is really smaller than you thought, which is going to come out more stringent than you thought. So the Gemara says no. Amar Reb Yirmiyah in shtei kosas blo gari nasan lo havu kebeya kosevas agasa v'gari nasa havi yisayim kebeya. No, it could be that even though 2 figs without the seeds is less than the size of an egg, but 1 with the seeds is really more. Amar Papa hainu da amri inshi. This is what people say. Trekabi de tmari charkava de kashaisa v'sriach. That 2 figs. Rashi translates as Trey kabi de tmari begar in hon. 2 kav of figs begar in hon with their seeds havu kaba de kashaisa is 1 kav of seeds v'sriach and even more. In other words, there was a statement people said that the seeds really take up more than the size of the fig. Okay, so the Gemara was assuming that if you tell me 2 figs without the seeds is less than the size of an egg, then putting the seeds into 1 wouldn't make it bigger. And the Gemara is willing to say no. It could be that the seeds take up much more space than you realized. Okay, so again, we know the shear by Yom Kippur is kosevas hagas, which means to be chayiv karis for Yom Kippur. A person who eats a big fig is going to be chayiv. We had Rav Yehuda who said that's really bigger than the size of an egg, which the Gemara tried to challenge. The challenge was that if I see in the Brisa that 2 figs without seeds is smaller than an egg. So the Gemara was assuming 1 fig with seeds is not going to be bigger than an egg. And the Gemara was willing to answer, no, it could be even though 2 figs without seeds is smaller, but 1 fig with seeds is really bigger. Okay. So Amud Bey is about 10 lines down. Rava Amar, Hasam Hainu Taimushim Dehavale Piri. Piri lo by sukkah. Rava is saying, what was your whole question? Your question was, if something's the size of an egg, it has to go in a sukkah. And I see in the story, when they brought them 2 figs, they didn't go in the sukkah. So if it must be that 2 figs is smaller than an egg. Because if it was the size of an egg, of course they should go to the sukkah. So Rav is saying, you're making an assumption. Your assumption is you have to eat fruits in a sukkah. If I would tell you that you don't have to eat fruits in a sukkah, then you don't have any proof. Because the whole proof was, if it was the size of an egg, you should have to go in a sukkah. And they, with their 2 figs, said you don't really have to go in a sukkah. They were stringent, but you don't really have to. So the Gemara was proving from there, you see that 2 figs without seeds must be smaller than an egg. Rav is saying, no, could be 2 figs is much bigger than an egg. You want to know why they didn't go in a sukkah? Because you don't have to eat fruits in a sukkah. So in other words, the Gemara before was assuming you would be chayiv to eat fruits in a sukkah. The only reason they didn't go must be it was too small. It was under the amount that has to be eaten in a sukkah. But Rav Amar, no. Hasam hainu taimim shim tehavale piri. Piri lo by sukkah. Rav is saying, no, the reason they didn't go in the sukkah is because they held that those were types of foods which the Torah doesn't require you to eat in a sukkah. Meisvei Amar Rebbe Kshayinu Lomdin Torah Eitzel Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua. Gemara is challenging. Rebbe said when we were learning Torah by Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua, Heviu lefanenu, they brought in front of us te'enim anavim, figs and grapes, v'achalnum, and we ate them achilos arai chutz l'sukkah. We ate them in achilos arai, which means like a temporary eating outside of the sukkah. Gemara says it sounds like achilos arai in. Sounds like to have a snack of the grapes is okay to do out of the sukkah. Achilos keva lo. Sounds like, but to have a whole meal of fruits would be a problem outside of the sukkah. So we're challenging Rava. Rava told us that you don't have to eat fruits in a sukkah. The Gemara is challenging, but it sounds in the Brisa, the only reason they could eat the fruits outside of the sukkah is because they were having a snack. Sounds like if they were having a meal, a full portion of fruits, they would have to go into the sukkah. So Gemara says, no, you can answer, Ema achalnum ki achilas arai chutz l'sukkah. And maybe the Brisa means to say that they ate the fruits, a lot of fruits, like an achilas arai, like a not permanent eating. In other words, fruits is defined as an achilas arai, and therefore it doesn't need to be eaten in a sukkah. We thought the Brisa was saying, since we ate a little amount of fruits, we didn't need a sukkah. Sounds like if you ate a lot of fruits, you would have to go in a sukkah. The Gemara is responding, no, you could read it as we ate a lot of fruits, which in halacha is defined like an achilas arai, a little bit of eating bread, which doesn't require eating in a sukkah, even if it's a lot of fruits. Ibay seima, or says the Gemara, chalnu machilas keva, chalnu pas ki achilas arai bahadayu chutz l'sukkah. Or you could read it as we ate fruits as an achilas keva, lots of fruits. And we ate bread as an achilas arai, a little bit of bread, chutz l'sukkah. So another answer that the Brisa is not saying if you eat lots of fruits, you have to go into a sukkah. But it just, that part of the Brisa which said achilas arai was talking about eating a different food. That was talking about eating bread, which we know if you eat a lot of bread, you have to go in the sukkah. And if you eat a tiny little bit, you don't. But when it came to the fruits, the Brisa was saying even eating lots of fruits does not require a sukkah. Okay, so it is an interesting Gemara. It sounds like the Gemara originally was assuming fruits need a sukkah in the original proof. Rav is the one being mechadish to us, changing for us, that no, really fruits don't need a sukkah, and the Gemara is challenging it. Okay, so meaning this is like a discussion in the Rishonim when they figure out how to paskin. Part of the discussion is this question, that the Gemara originally seemed to assume fruit should need a sukkah, and it sounds like it was Rava's chiddush. So do we hold of Rava or do we not? That's part of the discussion. The Mishnah in Sukkah says if a person was mashla, made it up with mini targima, so the literal translation I don't know, it normally means like snack foods. So the Gemara normally assumes it means mizonos, which we'll see here. Then he's yotze. So what is this? This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer in Sukkah, who says a person has to eat 14 sudas. Right? We don't hold like this. We hold a person is chayiv to eat in the Sukkah the first night, his kazayas or his more than a kibeya. And then the rest, if a person's Shabbos and Yantav, he has to eat, but he doesn't have to have a suda every day. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion was that each day, right, he held just like in a person's house, a person eats 2 main meals a day. So too Sukkah requires a chiyuv of 2 sudas, an obligation to have 2 meals every single day. But he said, if im hishlim b'mini targima yatsa, that if a person missed and he made it up with mini targima, snack foods, he's yotze. So if you would tell me that fruits require eating in a sukkah, lisni peiris, then why wouldn't he say peiris? So the Gemara is assuming the words mini targima is like mizonos foods. So we're saying I have a raya to Rava. Because Rabbi Eliezer, who's saying if you missed, you can make up, sounded like he jumped to a more filling food, mizonos. Yeah, you have noodles. Why did he skip over having an apple? Sounds like if he would have held that eating an apple in the sukkah is required, then he should have said fruits. Why did he jump to a more filling food like noodles? It must be it's a raya to Rava, supports Rava's opinion, which is that fruits doesn't need a sukkah. That's why Rabbi Eliezer wasn't willing to say if you make it up with fruits, you're good. That's why he had to jump and say if you eat a more filling food like mizonos, so then you're yotze. So it sounds like it's a support for Rava's opinion that fruits don't need a sukkah. Gemara says, no, you can't prove it. My mini targima peiros. Maybe I can answer that mini targima means fruits. In other words, the Gemara's assumption was mini targima means mizonos foods, and therefore it was a proof to Rava because he skipped over the option of eating fruits. The Gemara's answer is no, you can't prove it. Because it could be when he said mini targima, maybe he was really referencing fruits. Maybe he said mini targima because he was talking in a place where there weren't so many fruits around. But maybe it's not to tell you that you can't do it with fruits, but he was just saying that it was more common to have mini targima around. Okay, so we had one opinion on Amar Aleph, which said that the koseves, which means the shear, the amount that if a person eats on Yom Kippur, he's chayiv kares, is bigger than the size of an egg. That was the first opinion of Amal. Rav Zvid Amar Koseves Agasa Sha'amru Chaseru Mikabeh. Rav Zvid held the opposite, that the shear for Yom Kippur is a little bit less than the size of an egg. So where did he get that from? That's not. Beishamai Omrim Seor Bekazayis Chametz Bekekoseves. Okay, so this is Beis Shammai's opinion. We know there's a prohibition in the Torah called Bal Yireh Bal Yimate, which means a person is not allowed to own chametz or Pesach. So now, what amount is it that the person transgressed that prohibition? So Beis Shammai's opinion was Seor, if it's sourdough, it's bekazayis. Then the shear to be chayiv is owning a kazayis. If it's chametz, which is like bread, piece of bread, then it's kikosevis. Then the shear is a kosevis. Vavinan ban, we ask my time with the Beis Shammai. Where did Beis Shammai get his opinion that there should be a different amount for seor and for chametz? Nichter rachman chametz, below boi seor. Beis Shammai right seor. Va'ana amina al no. Chametz, a piece of bread which doesn't have that much chametz in it, still is aser with a kazayis. I can't have a kazayis of it. So seor shechimutzo kasha lokol shekain. So seor sourdough, which has much more chametz in it, for sure I can't have a kazayis of it. So let the Torah just write the bigger chiddush. Even chametz, a piece of bread which doesn't have that much chametz in it, you can't have a kazayis. And I'll know that something which has much more chametz in it, the se'or, for sure I can't have a kazayis. That was Beis Shammai's question. The Torah wrote both. Beis Shammai's brother, why write both? If you just tell me chametz, I'll figure out se'or. So therefore Beis Shammai said, Mitabalginu rachmana, by the fact that the Torah wrote both, limda lecha shi'ura shel zeh lo kishi'ura shel zeh. Must be the Torah is really saying they don't have the same amount. Because if the Torah wanted them to have the same amount, it could have wrote one, could have wrote chametz, and I would have known, then for sure se'or is not going to be better. If the Torah wrote both, it must be it really is because there's two different measurements, and therefore I wouldn't have been able to learn one from the other, and that's why the Torah had to write both. So midapalginu rachman alum de lecha, by the fact the Torah wrote both, it taught you shi'ur shel zeh lo kishi'ur shel zeh. So se'or is bekazayis, therefore he came out that se'or, which is much more chametz in it, is more stringent, that it's usher even with a kazayis. If you have a kazayis of it, then that's bal yira bal yimatze. That's transgressing that lav. But chametz, which a piece of bread which has less chametz in it, then you're only transgress it if it's a kosevis. If it's the shear of a kosevis. Okay, so now we know that's how Beis Shammai got to his opinion, which means se'or, it's the size of a kazayis, an olive, but chametz, a piece of bread, he bumped it up to a kosevis. So now we have to figure out, where is kosevis? Is it the size of an egg, less than an egg, more than an egg? That's what we're going to be trying to pay attention to. Again, Beis Shammai said that se'or, which has more chametz in it, that's the size of a kazayis. But he told me chametz gets bumped up, and what's the name? The name is kosevis. Now, where does kosevis fit on the charts? Is it more than an egg, less than an egg, same as an egg? So says Rav Zvid, if somebody will tell me that when the shir by Yom Kippur, koseves hagasa, means more than an egg, michti Beis Shammai ashiura de nafish mikazayis kamahadri. Beis Shammai was bothered that it can't be se'or and chametz is the same amount, because then he was bothered, let the Torah just write chametz and I'll know se'or. So what does that question prove? That question proves that it has to be that chametz, which has less, a piece of bread which has less chametz in it, needs to be bumped up something over se'or. But how far do you bump it up? If se'or is kazayis, and you're bothered, chametz must be bumped up, so l'chari, you should only be able to bump it up one notch. Right? You don't get to jump and say, you're only over by chametz if you have 50 pounds. Okay, so says Rizvid, if somebody will tell me that when we said koseves hagasa, which means the size of a thick fig, it means more than the size of an egg, Beis Shammai is just looking for something a little bit more than a kazayis. Because he said if sourdough is a kazayis, so it has to be chametz is more. So he's looking for something a little more than a kazayis. So lisni kebeya. So why didn't Beis Shammai say that the amount to transgress bal yira bal yimatze, owning chametz, owning a piece of bread, is the size of an egg? And even if you'll tell me that a koseves and an egg are the same, he still should have said the size of an egg, Rashi says, because that's the much more common term we use. So why did Beis Shammai say this new shear called koseves? Says Rizvidel, Shma mina koseves pchusa mikebeya. It must be that Beis Shammai held like me, that said that the shear of the amount of a koseves, this fig, is really less than an egg, and therefore that was the first thing to bump up to. So again, Beis Shammai said, if you have sourdough, the amount's kazayis. And Beis Shammai had a question, it must be chametz is more. Now, if here's the size of an egg, and here's the size of a koseves, so Rav Zid saying then it's very good. Beis Shammai was bothered, chametz must be more. the first thing he found, the next shear we found somewhere else was koseves, size of a fig. So that's how Beis Shammai knew that the size of chametz, that the amount of chametz to own is a koseves. But says Rav Zvid, if you're going to tell me here's an egg and koseves is up here, so then how did Beis Shammai know to jump all the way up here? He should have said, if this is the amount of sourdough to be over, so then the next shear, which I found, which is the size of an egg, is the amount of the Torah that you can't own of bread. How did they jump all the way up? It must be that the next thing after Kazayas was the size of Koseves. So it says, that's my raya, that when we say the shear of Koseves, we really mean less than the size of an egg, and therefore Beis Shammai jumped up one notch. Says the Gemara challenges Mimai. How do you know that's true? I could argue that the size of a koseves is really more than the size of an egg. Hastama kebeya. But maybe a not thick egg, a not thick fig, would be the same as an egg. And even if they're the same, so Beis Shammai chose to pick one of the two. In other words, what the Gemara is challenging is, you were assuming, our Mishnah said, a koseves hagasa, a big fig. Beis Shammai just said a normal-sized fig. So Rav Zvid, you're trying to prove to me that when it comes to Yom Kippur, the amount to be chayiv kares is the size of a big fig, and you're trying to prove to me that's smaller than the size of an egg. You said the Gemara is challenging you. You can't prove that from here, because here we're talking about the size of a normal-sized fig. So yeah, you could prove to me a normal-sized fig is smaller than an egg, the same size as an egg, but that doesn't prove what we're talking about. We're talking about a koseves hagasa, a big-sized fig. So if it's a big-sized fig, it still could be that it's bigger than the size of an egg. In other words, the proof proved that either a small fig is the same as an egg or less than an egg, and that's how Beis Shammai knew to jump there, and they didn't skip to a bigger shear. But the Gemara's challenge, that still doesn't prove our question. Our question is, by Yom Kippur, where the Mishnah said, koseves hagasa, a big fig, so where is that? Is that the same as an egg, less than an egg, more than an egg? You can't prove that. Because even if by a small fig, it's the size of an egg or less, that doesn't prove if you tell me, what about jumbo size? So if it's the big fig, it could be that the shear really is still bigger than an egg. Ela mehacha. Says the Gemara, Rav Zvid's makar, his source was from here. Ad kama mezamnin. How much does a person have to eat to make a zimun? Rashi says, meaning to bench. Ad kezayis, the Reb Meir. Reb Meir's opinion was a person only has to eat a kezayis of bread to bench. Reb Yehuda Omer ad kebeya. At the bench, a person has to eat the size of an egg. B'mai kemifligi, says the Gemara, what's the machlokas based on? Reb Meir savar v'achalta zuachila. When the pasuk says v'achalta v'savata, he read it as v'achalta means you ate, v'savata zu shtia, and savata means you drink. V'achila b'kazayis. And when the Torah says eating, so normally the word eating is defined by a kazayis. So the pasuk by benching said v'achalta v'savata, which means you ate and you drink. And achila means you ate a kazayis, and then it says ubeirachta, you should bench. Reb Yehuda savar, Reb Yehuda holds achalta v'savata achila sheyesh basvia. He read it as achalta v'savata, which means defining how much you ate is an achila, in eating sheyesh basvia v'savata, which means some level of satiation. Ve'ez zeh kebeya. And he held that eating a kezayis, that's not called satiation at all. But once you eat the size of an egg, that's already considered a person ate a significant amount. That's called svia. Says Rav Zvid, if you're going to tell me that the shear by Yom Kippur is really bigger than the size of an egg, hashta kebeya svui misava daiti lo meisva, the size of an egg can fill a person up, right? That's what Rabbi Yehuda told us. That a person to bench has to eat an egg because that's called satiation. So says Rav Zvid, eating the size of an egg can be called svia, which means a person's satisfied. But it's not called meisva daita, it's not called that he's calmed down, he's eaten something. In other words, there's two different gauges going on. By Yom Kippur, the gauge is what Chazal called meis v'daite, which means some level of he feels relieved from having eaten something. By benching, the shear is svia, satiation. So what Rav Zvid's saying is, if I see in Rabbi Yehuda that eating the size of an egg is called satiation, and therefore you can bench, so then he's saying to tell me that if you ate that amount, it's called satiation, svia, but it's still not called meis v'daite, it's not called some level of calm down. It must be that eating the size of a big fig is really less than the size of an egg. And kebeya misava kekoseves meis v'daite. If you eat a little bit less than an egg, so then that's already called meis v'daite. He's calmed down from eating something. But to get to the next level of svia, satiation, that you have to have a little more. You have to have a sheer kebeya. Okay, so just to summarize what comes out, the Mishnah said to be chayiv kares, the shear that a person eats is koseves hagasa, which means a big koseves, fig, kamoa kargarinasa, it and its seeds. Okay, so we spoke out at the beginning that the main difference about how much you eat is in situations where a person is not feeling well. So even though we learned before that to eat any amount is asur min ha'torah, is prohibited, but it's much more lenient than eating the shear. If you eat the shear, so then it's kares. If you eat less, it's an isser. It's prohibited, but it's not kares. So if a person is not feeling well on Yom Kippur, this is why we have shiurim. This is why we eat less, to avoid the more stringent amount. So that's why it's important to figure out how much it is, so that when a person has to eat, we give him less than that amount. Okay, so we had a question in the Gemara. How do you read the Mishnah when it said koseves? Does it mean with the seeds or without the seeds? So that really was Rav Papa's question, and Rav Ashi held it means with the seeds. And then we had a machlokas in the Gemara that where does this shear fit? We know in other places we have a shear called a kazayas, we have a shear called the size of an egg. So what is koseves hagasa? Is that more than an egg, less than an egg? So that was really a machlokas in the Gemara. Rav Yehuda held that it's really bigger than the size of an egg, which for my conversation would be a leniency. If a person needs to eat on Yom Kippur, it would come out of leniency. He can really eat a little more. He can for sure eat the size of an egg. But Rav Zvid held that it's really less. It's a little bit less than the size of an egg, which would come out of stringency, that if a person is not feeling well, he really has to eat less than the first opinion. Really, we hold like the second opinion, like Rav Zvid, meaning it's not so clear what exactly the shear is, meaning even the way the Gemara said it was pchusa, it's like a little bit less than an egg. So it's not so clear in the Gemara what exactly the shear is, but we come out like that second opinion, that more stringent, that a person can't eat even a little bit less than an egg, that's already the shear. Okay, we'll give you a little time to say brachas.